The title of this solo podcast is Wild Freedom, the Story of Attachment. I wish the Buddhists and those who claim to be truly committed to helping humanity with the problems of a human being's life were actually as committed as they claim. Because they are in a real position to truly change people's lives. And instead of being sincere and genuine in both their pursuit and the revelation of this truth about the fundamental nature of the problems of life, they enter into a world of culture and prescription. And if they themselves succumb to what the rest of society succumbs to, then what they do is simply another detail and another example of that which society does. And they're supposed to be the ones who help man escape from the binds of society and the imprisonments of himself. That, I think, is the real crime. The human beings who devote themselves or who claim to devote themselves really have allowed themselves to succumb like everyone else, and so they're just as common as the common man. So how can they truly help human beings out of the quicksand? It's really a shame. When you hear things like attachment and about attachment and about the pains of life and about anxieties and fears and all of the pains that a human being suffers in his life, he goes to the internet, or he goes to books, or he goes to temples and monasteries in search of the truth about a genuine way out of these things, so that he can live a free and a whole life. But what he gets is patronization. He gets, well, just go in the corner and meditate and be mindful and practice loving kindness and you'll get over it. It's frankly insulting, and I think that is the most egregious of crimes, is a person who is put into the position or claims to be in a position to truly help humanity. If a heathen does so, then that's understandable because he's a heathen. But if someone who claims to be put into a position to truly help humanity, if that person succumbs to the same patronization, academics, minutia, and empty jargon that the intellectuals pursue, then he commits the biggest crime, because he was truly claiming to be in a position of help. So, like anything else that I've discovered in life, that if you truly want the truth about something, there's no one who can help you. If you want prescriptions, you have an entire world at your feet, at your disposal, selling all kinds of contraptions on every street corner around the world. But if you want the truth, then when you look outside, you discover a barren wasteland of empty desert and tumbleweeds. You're on your own. So let us discuss freedom. A human being at some point in his life is free. When he is a small child, he is free. As he grows up, he begins to gain an identity through the portal of a name, a whereabouts, who his family is. And then as he grows older, he gets married, he has children. And this applies to, obviously, men and women. And something happens to him along the way, and he doesn't really know the day that it happened. But from that moment forward, he enters into a different dimension of life, which is an entirely false dimension. And in doing so, he leaves freedom completely behind. He enters into the dimension of a new identity, one of being a mother or a father, or a child of or a sister or a brother. If we speak specifically about families for now, he enters into an entire escapade, an entire circus, an entire drama, an entire soap opera. And he doesn't view it as such, because to use the word soap opera is to trivialize it as if one could see it as a soap opera. But the human being doesn't see it as a soap opera. He sees it as his reality. And so within this so-called family structure, many things begin to go wrong. There are conflicts, and there are this person wants this and this person wants that, and the child wants this and the parent wants that. And there's this complex web of interconnection, and these interconnections are not interconnections of humans. They are interconnections of minds, and each of these minds is beholden and mired and caught in a web of attachment. And each person is attached to his or her own idea as to what the other person should do. And ultimately, that attachment is based upon a foundation of wanting to make oneself, quote, happy. And that happiness won't come unless things happen in a certain way. And the things that happen in a certain way are dependent upon the other person or persons acquiescing to that way. And then there's conflict, and then there's sorrow, and then there's sadness, and then there's anger, and then there's anxiety, and then there's fear, and then there's resentment, and then there's pains, and then there's apologies, and then there's and this is how the human being's life moves. And he, over years, begins to live in this way for so long that this becomes real to him. This becomes his new life and his only life. And then he begins to naturally seek fixes as to how to move away from or gain freedom from this anxiety and this fear and these such things. And then that creates a new subset of imprisonment, which is the imprisonment of the fixes. And each fix leads to a different fix. And he goes to the psychologist, and the psychologist says, well, make sure that you are kind and forgiving, and say this but don't say that, and understand that people are sometimes this way and they'll get over it, and eventually you'll come around, they'll come around. He just extends the soap opera for you. And then he goes to a motivational speaker and he tells him rah crap, and try to be happy and get over yourself and pick yourself up, and today is a new day, and that leads to more imprisonment. And then he reads books about self-help and self-development, and they give him aphorisms to say, and so-called hacks and morning routines, and meditate and go for a run and exercise. And then he goes to a spiritual person or a guru or a monk or a Buddhist priest or and they tell him their own version of prescriptions and austerities that he should be doing, and no matter what the other person says, exude love and give compassion, and so this person then enters this washing machine in which he rolls around for years and years and years in response and in order to fix the previous washing machine that he had entered, which is the soap opera of the new identity of family and attachments and so forth. And thus he becomes imprisoned in every way possible. So what is the truth? Well, the truth is that there's no way to prescribe oneself into freedom. There's only a way to prescribe oneself into imprisonment. That's the truth. What is the truth about arriving at freedom? The truth about arriving at freedom is to understand what freedom really is. Wild freedom, raw freedom, is freedom from the need to have to fix anything. It is freedom from the very arising of pain. It is freedom from the impetus that spawns emotional turmoil. It is the freedom from the very seed of the devastation that human beings feel. It is a return back to one's natural state before he succumbed to the images that led to the soap operas in which he finds himself living. That sort of freedom does not exist in society, and it does not exist within the halls of monasteries. It exists only as a possibility in the one who truly desires it, not for the pleasure that it will bring, but because it will bring an end to the search for all pleasure. Raw freedom, wild freedom, is a state in which one understands that he has entered into soap operas, and that in these soap operas of identity and image, nothing will ever be all right. He will spend his entire life clenching his teeth, biting his tongue, clenching his fists, trying to convince himself that it is okay, when in his heart he knows that it is not. Nothing can ever be okay. Nothing will ever be peaceful in the world of attachment. And naturally, and very logically, the question arises, how can one not be attached to their family? How can a parent not be attached to their children? And I think that the word attachment must be understood. Attachment is need. Put simply, attachment is need. I put up a message on Twitter recently, which I'll have to read it because I forgot exactly what it is that I said. And it speaks perfectly to attachment. Those whom you love will be the source of your suffering. And another one which says, what a man becomes attached to becomes his coffin. Now, naturally, one will ask, how can one not be attached to their family or their spouse or their children? Well, if you ask the Buddhists, they'll tell you don't be attached, which is ludicrous. I mean, it is so dismissive to say that. One must understand, not follow a precept. Whenever one is attached, then the thing or the person to which one is attached to will be the puppeteer, and you will be the puppet. That is attachment. However the other person or thing moves will be the way that the person himself moves. This is attachment. So where there's attachment, there cannot be freedom, because one's needs are invested in the other person or the other thing. Then naturally one will ask, well, how can one not be invested in their family or children? You know, to have a child is to give oneself to the child and need nothing in return from the child. And that will come across too easily. That was spoken a little bit too easily, because it will be viewed as a platitude. But it won't be viewed as a platitude if one understands the consequences of not doing it that way. If one views exactly and genuinely with open eyes where one is, he sees that he is trapped. And he's trapped in such profound misery and anxiety and fear that he doesn't know which way is up. anymore. So the truth is that which is acutely necessary, not that which sounds nice. It is that which is desperately necessary. When one is no longer attached to needing respect, or to needing so-called love, or to needing reciprocation, or to needing the other person to make him happy, when one is no longer attached to the idea of happiness itself, he becomes wildly free. And this is exactly what every human being, from the depths of their bones, is craving, whether they realize it or not. Good night. The title of this podcast is Why Leaders Are Ruled by Their Subordinates. This is a fairly common issue, although it's rarely recognized. It certainly is recognized within the hearts of leaders who feel this sort of imprisonment. It happens a lot, for instance, in medicine, as an example. Many physicians are, in effect, ruled by their nurses. In businesses, executives are often ruled by their secretaries. CEOs often feel a sense of insecurity around certain employees. And within the mind of the leader, there is a fairly pronounced conundrum, and that is that outwardly and from a hierarchical business perspective, the leader is the leader, and the leader is in charge of his or her subordinates. But this is in direct contrast to the feeling that he or she sometimes has that there is a particular level of insecurity or fear with regard to one's secretary or with regard to a particular employee. And that leader often feels sandwiched in between these two ideas, one being that he or she should not feel fear because the person is in fact the leader and the subordinate is the subordinate. And on the other hand, there is an undeniable feeling that one is in fact afraid or feels enslaved by the subordinate. So where you have these two, a confluence of these two contrary elements, the individual feels trapped in between them. It is very difficult, almost impossible, to admit to another person from an egoic perspective that he or she is afraid of their subordinate. And it is, in many ways, even more difficult to admit to oneself that one is afraid of their subordinates. Because once something is stated, either as a deliberate conscious thought or verbally to oneself, then it enters the domain of reality. It becomes documented in the fabric of reality. And once that step is taken, it cannot be reversed. As long as it is a passing thought, one can suppress it and one can deny it. But as soon as it is stated with full conscious effort to one's own self, then there's no turning back. And that's why it is very difficult for human beings in general to be completely honest with themselves. This is confounded by, and in very many ways created by, rules. So why is it that fear of someone should cause problems? Well, the rules say that you are the leader and therefore you should lead. But the rules also say that you should be compassionate and you should be understanding and you should be caring, and the leader should be empathetic and nurturing to those he means to lead or to guide or to govern. And whenever you have that many rules, one cannot possibly satisfy them all, because amidst those rules there are definitely feelings that are undeniable, and those feelings do not acquiesce to rules. Those feelings stand on their own in their own right. They don't succumb to rules. Only the intellect likes to adhere to rules. So what is a person to do who feels a sense of fear of their subordinates? Well, it isn't a question of what one should do. Really, it's a matter of understanding, because if you view things from the standpoint of what to do, then even if you're given an effective answer as to what to do, that'll only apply to a particular circumstance, and therefore you will need 10,000 different answers for each different circumstance, and that is hardly a practical way to approach any problem. Whereas if one approaches things from the level of understanding, then that understanding becomes pluripotent, and it applies to all things. It's very nimble and liquid and fluid, and customizable to various different situations. So the understanding is that first and foremost, it is crucial to be honest with oneself. Now, is that a rule? No, it's not a rule. It is a complete necessity, because rules are based upon morality and societal tenets and shoulds and should nots and righteous sort of ideas. Whereas understandings, things that are necessary, are based upon the way things are. And if they are not done that way, then problems occur, not created by society, but by nature. So if one is honest with oneself, then most problems begin to actually go away. In fact, it is precisely because one is not honest with oneself that they are in fact afraid or intimidated by a certain subordinate that perpetuates the problem. If one is completely honest with oneself that this person makes me uneasy, even though this person is quote below me from a hierarchical standpoint, the fact is I'm a human being, that person's a human being, and we're human beings before we are CEO versus employee. And as a human being, CEO though I may be, leader though I may be, this person causes some fear within inside of me. The very admission of that fact to oneself changes the game, because now that person is not playing a reactive game. Now that person isn't looking for a solution. That person is defining the problem. So once one is honest with oneself that this employee makes me nervous, then the most important thing is to understand, what is it that one truly fears? Well, this is where things become interesting. No one really fears another. Human beings fear themselves. What does that mean? I'll explain. Human beings fear what their reaction will be to the reaction of the other person. This is what they fear. Human beings also fear the feeling that they will have once the other person makes the reaction that he or she is predicted to make. So human beings are afraid of feeling a certain way. If, for instance, the leader says to do X and the employee says, no, I'm not going to do it, that that sort of, quote, disobedience or denial of the leader will create within a leader a problem. One is embarrassment. Another is the feeling that he or she did not adhere to his authority. That will then lead to questions of what he or she should do, which will then lead to questions of, well, if he reacts in a certain way, then will the reaction be looked upon as simply retaliation or something that was done that was necessary? So a whole litany of things will come into the leader's mind. And so the leader does not want to feel cornered. The leader does not want to feel that his word was not listened to, because that will create further insecurity within him. So what we are afraid of, what all humans are afraid of, are the negative feelings that will arise from situations. The person who plays a sport, the athlete who plays a sport, the reason that he fears losing is because he doesn't fear the losing itself. He fears the fear that, well, he fears the feeling that the losing creates, not the loss itself. So there are so many things that happen within the mind of a leader that to which he is reacting to on a constant basis that he does not even recognize or realize that he is reacting to, because the things that he's reacting to are never even seen. And the reason they are never seen is because he lives in a society and a culture that promotes action as opposed to incisiveness. It promotes prescription as opposed to introspection. It is precisely in the seeing of things that one becomes free. It is precisely in the doing of things that one remains bound. So if a leader wishes to create pure actions, and as a result of those pure actions, to live in a place of peace within himself, so that his actions can continue to be pure and effective, then he will have to arrive at a point in which he recognizes that every one of his actions are motivated by a particular stimulus, and that stimulus is within him. And in the recognition and the seeing of what those stimuli are, only then will he be able to become truly effective without causing turmoil to the maturation of his company or to his day-to-day existence. So it is precisely in the seeing of things, in the honest, genuine, natural, organic introspection, to discover what is at the heart, what is at the core that is driving all of one's actions. It is in seeing those things that makes a leader truly supreme. Good night. The title of this solo podcast is What is Life? It's very difficult to know what precisely life is. Is it the events that occur in a human being's life? Is that life? Is it how he feels? Is it his accomplishments, his failures? how his children turn out, what his family life is like. From what angle can one view something? And this is the difficult thing about everything, is that there's so many angles. There's no clear guide to anything. One can view anything at all from any perspective. The mind is infinite. It travels to all domains in a flash, in an instant. We are told by society that we should do this and that, and we should view life from this perspective, and that life is about happiness, or life is about helping other people. But even if you look at the standpoint of, or the viewpoint of helping other people, what is that but a chance to make oneself feel good? So there's nothing negative or positive about any of these things. The question is, what is the truth? Is life all about wanting to feel good? Because that seems to be the driving force behind the fundamental existence of man, is the desire to feel good. I wish to succeed so that I may feel good. I wish to become wealthy so that I may feel good. I wish to help others so that I may feel that I'm a benevolent individual and that I have done for my fellow man. I wish to be kind to others so that I can gain a sense of moral correctness. So everything is related to an ulterior motive of wanting to feel good. And it really, I grow tired of sometimes mentioning these disclaimers. But there's no negative or positive here. There's no right and wrong. There's no good and bad. It isn't wrong or negative to want to feel good. It's an examination of the truth. Well, what is it that life fundamentally, in its ultimate grainy reality, what is it? I think it's a falling leaf. I think it's a river that flows toward the ocean without having any interest in arriving at the ocean, nor any interest in being proud of its effort of moving towards the ocean. I think it's the wind that blows, a knock on the door, a clapping of one's hands. Anything and everything that has nothing at all to do with the intellect. That is life. Anything at all that does not involve the domain of thought and thinking, or strategizing, or intentionality, or wanting to achieve, or hoping to provide, or desiring to gain, or needing to give, where there are not even the seeds of rules, where there isn't even the shadow of a hope, where what is, and there is no opinion about what is. What is life? It's the ringing of a bell. That's one's entire life. There is no significance to anything. And the reason that there is no significance to anything is because nothing lasts. There cannot be anything significant about something that does not last. An emotion arrives today and it leaves the very next minute. A success arrives today and it fails to have an impact after a few weeks or a few days. There is a constant need for replenishment, a constant need to replace what has disappeared. Therefore, there is nothing permanent. Everything in this life is temporary. Therefore, how can it have any significance? Nothing can have a weight. W-E-I-G-H-T. Nothing can have a weight if it is here only for a moment. I think one of the central myths that leads humans astray is once again something that is so invisible, like prescriptions, that it is never even thought to be examined, and that is the need to become happy. And whenever I say anything, it will be natural. It will be a natural reflexive tendency of your mind to immediately jump to the opposite. So if I say that a myth that leads man astray is the need to be happy, the mind will often immediately jump to, well, then should I be sad? And happiness and sadness, joy and misery are all the same because they only exist because of the other. There would be no need for happiness if there was no misery. So they are interdependent, and because they are interdependent, they cannot survive in their own soil. When one thing requires another, then it doesn't in fact exist. It is only a reaction to. It is spawned by. Something that is real, something that is true, exists of its own domain. It needs no support. It requires no explanation. It is truth. It is solid. It is incontrovertible. It depends upon no one and nothing. So, what is life? Like all things, I think that one arrives at the truth by way of negation, by way of elimination, by way of subtraction. And when all the things that one has believed to be significant when all the things that one has believed to be real, and all the beliefs that one has had are removed, when they are seen through, when they are recognized as a whim of the mind and an imbibement of societal influence, then the amorphous and unspeakable, nameless non-entity that remains is the closest thing to the truth. While there is everything in this life, it is all a mirage. It's passing clouds. It's one explosion after another. It's sound that comes and goes. And we as humans get in the way. And as we get in the way, we feel as if it is happening to us. But in reality, things happen in the vicinity of ourselves. They do not really happen to us because there really is no us for them to happen to. I think it's very important not to attempt to read into my words, because if you do, then you will fall into the trap of intellectualization. The words must have a communion with one's interiority without being touched by the filtering mechanism of the mind. For the filtering mechanism of the mind will repackage them into untruth. It will repackage them into ideas to analyze and philosophize about. And this will lead to questions that are based largely in intellectual gymnastics. And this is precisely the habit of the mind, because it recognizes that when a human hears truth, its job is to remove him as quickly as possible from that truth in order to keep it within its domain of the mind. Whatever gets through, and what does not, does not. There is no need from my end for things to get through, as it would be best if there was no need for you to need to allow things to get through. Whatever the communion is, it is. Whatever the chemical reaction that takes place between two elements takes place. Involvement is interference. So what is life? It's nothing and everything. And all the things that one has thought that his life really was. It really is not. Good night. The title of this solo podcast is The Secret of Otherworldly Success. You know, it seems to be the fashion in writing that you hold the secret or the climax until the end, and you build up to it. I don't really believe in such things. I like to reveal it at the beginning, because quite frankly, whenever there's a build up to things, usually it almost never pans out. So I don't believe in playing games. The secret to otherworldly success is purity. What does that mean? When someone fantasizes or dreams of becoming a success, the crux and the essence of that dream centers around the periphery of the success, what someone will get, how wealthy they will become, how it will feel to have finally, quote, made it. These are all the fringes and the benefits and the pleasures of success. So the dreams of success are never really about the thing. They're almost always about the pleasurable aspects of what the success will gain someone. That is impure. Now, in that very breath, I must state that there is no right or wrong, and there is no rule that one must be pure. Everything happens. Everything that is of any importance happens due to the effect, not due to rules. So the effect of doing things impurely is that one never has his full faculties at his command. He is always subservient to the pleasure of the outcome. He is always enslaved to the execution of whatever needs to be executed, while not having all of his tools available to him. Because what he is chasing is the pleasurable outcome, or the award, or the money, or the trophy, or whatever it may be. The cause of chasing pleasure, the cause of chasing the fringe benefits of success, naturally and necessarily leads to the effect of being handcuffed as one pursues that success. Therefore, the real world consequence of impurity is ineffectiveness. When something is done from a pure standpoint, then one is chasing the thing itself. Now, even this must be looked at with open eyes. An individual might, for instance, have grown up in poverty, and that person's success, that person's goal, might be to become wealthy. Wealthy for wealthy's sake, just to escape poverty. Since there are no rules, there is no good and bad, there is no morality. If that person is pure in his desire for wealth, because it frees him from a life of poverty, if that is pure in his heart, then that is not a fringe benefit. So this is where society will really fall apart. This is a bridge that it cannot cross, because it is so handcuffed and straitjacketed by rules that it cannot see beyond the blinders of its own false moral senses. When one does something for the purity of it, because the thing itself is what drives him, and it is not done for the fringe benefit or for the door prize, so to speak, then one gains all of the faculties that one needs. All of his talents become available to him. And I'll explain why that is. Behind every success, there's often a great insecurity. The insecurity of wondering if one will make it. And that insecurity, that fear of not being able to make it, actually leads to a flailing of the arms and a running in all directions, and a hard working and a beating oneself to the bone and bloodying one's hands, and all of the romantic ideas that are the natural offshoots of something that is driven by fear, something that is driven by anxiety. So when that is not there, when the feeling of anxiety or fear of not making it is not there, then the quality of one's efforts and the quality of one's pursuit changes drastically. When it is no longer part of the equation that one may not make it, one's entire life, the entire complexion of one's journey changes. I will say that in almost all cases, the pursuit of success is always spurred by a fear of failure. So if through whatever means one recognized that making it was a certainty, then the things that he would and would not do would be drastically different than the things he would and would not do if he were spurred by the anxiety and the fear of possibly not making it. So where there is purity, where there is a sense of doing something for a very focused, in a very focused way, for a very focused outcome, to arrive at the truth about whatever one's domain is, whatever one's craft, whatever one's art may be, one begins to feel in his heart that that thing is accessible because of the purity with which he is pursuing it. And it must be repeated, it must be underscored that this purity is not a rule. It is not good to be pure. It is not proper or correct. It is simply effective. It is simply the way to do things that results in the least interference. It is the way to approach things that allows one to have all of his faculties and his talents in his back pocket. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding in the world of performance among sports psychologists and business coaches and motivational speakers and the whole lot is this idea that performance is a goal, and it is fundamentally not true. Performance is a side effect. If it is viewed as a goal, it fails. The world is enamored by the idea of skill acquisition across all professional sports and all domains of business and entertainment and Olympics and whatever it may be. The idea that is in the water, the central tenet upon which all pursuits are based with regards to coaching in the world of performance, is that skill acquisition is the God. That acquiring skill is the most important thing. But in all of my experiences and in all of my experimentations and in my examinations and in my dissections of this topic over many years, I have discovered that skill acquisition is not by any means the biggest problem of elite individuals. Their problem is skill access. If one has $1 million in the bank, but he can only access 400,000, the solution is not to deposit more money in the bank. And yet this is exactly what all sports psychologists and performance coaches around the world do. The real solution is to find out why it is that one has $1 million in the bank, but he can only access 400,000. So skill access, this is a problem of access. It is not a problem of acquisition because this individual has already acquired the amount that's in the bank. But he is $600,000 short in his ability to access it. So the world seems to have everything on its head. It seems to look at everything backwards. And it is no reason that, it's no wonder that everyone goes astray because they are subject to false ideas. Ideas that are based upon opinion and tradition and not based upon truth. So if one views things from the sense of purity, if one views things from the sense of discovering what it is that really moves that person, and arrives at the point in which the idea and the poison of possibly not making it is removed, then that person gains access to all of his skill. And he saves many, many years in his pursuit of the otherworldly success. And the more pure he becomes, the less he cares about failures along the way, and the more he views them as experimentations, naturally, not by some motivational quote. Naturally. This is a natural offspring. This is a natural byproduct of. All otherworldly things are side effects. If they are pursued as goals, they fail. If one views things from the standpoint of purity, and if that purity is refined and refined, until nothing but division remains, otherworldly success will chase a man to the ends of the earth. Good night. The title of this solo podcast is The Raw Truth About Living in the Moment. Let's get straight to the point. There is nothing that you can do to get into the moment with any form of consistency. There is no prescription. There is no breathing method. There is no meditation. There is no mindfulness. There is nothing in the world that exists ever, anywhere, in any part of the planet that a human being can employ as some form of a doing or a prescription or a trick or a technique or a hack or a method, no matter how holy or how spiritual or how lauded it may be. It is not possible. This is yet another example of society leading people astray, and also, quite frankly, another example of people seeking to be led astray. The moment is an otherworldly element only because a human being has been led elsewhere by his belief systems and his conditioning. And where he has been led is into the realms of the mind. The mind which tells him who he is, the mind which tells him what is right and what is wrong, the mind that tells him what he must do, and oftentimes what he must do in order to get out of the mind. You see, the mind doesn't care what you're doing, even if you're waging war with it, as long as you are doing something. Because as long as it keeps you prescribing, and as long as it keeps you doing some form of an activity, it knows that it has you. So, if you came to this solo podcast seeking to get into the moment, what I will tell you is something that is pure, honest, sincere, and truthful. If you leave this podcast with one truth, not as an intellectual form of learning, but as a realization that hits home, and perhaps it won't hit home today, and perhaps it may even age over the years. Perhaps you'll come to it by repeated failures of having arrived at the moment through the various different means that gurus and books and the spiritual community has tried to convince you of. That is this. It is impossible to prescribe your way into the moment with any form of regularity or consistency. Living in the moment is a complete impossibility by way of a bridge of prescription. Don't believe me. I will speak the truth. You can do with it what you like. Whenever there is an intermediary of prescription, the light is shined upon that intermediary. It never leads you. This is a bridge that goes nowhere. Then how about when a person does find the moment? Well, the person who finds the moment by accident, which is typically how it happens, he experiences the glory of the moment, and in that time there are no thoughts, and there are no feelings, and there are no emotions. It's this feeling of great peace. Probably the greatest word to say is it's overwhelming peace. Everything is settled. There's a sense of floating almost, that no matter what happened, it would be okay. But those things come very rarely, and when they come, and even when they come and they go very quickly. So is it truly possible to arrive at the moment and live there? Well, I have raised the question, and now I suppose I must answer it. The answer is going to be anticlimactic, because the answer is going to be yes. But you will not hear that yes. You will not hear it without hoping for a prescription that might follow the word yes. In finding the moment, in living in the moment, this arrives in what I call living in the cocoon of the moment. It arrives when someone truly desires it, genuinely and naturally, as opposed to viewing it as a success, as opposed to viewing it as a form of accomplishment. If it is a feather in the cap, it does not come. So, the idea that I want to get into the moment often is a very reactive idea. It's reactive to a feeling which says that one should get into the moment. It's reactive to the idea that it's healthy, proper, correct, spiritual to get into the moment. Those sorts of ideas, they don't have any power to sustain anyone. They're full of fumes. The person who seeks the moment genuinely is the person who realizes that everything in his life leads nowhere. That behind every door is an empty room. And no matter what the promise may be, it's always an empty room. Inside every sealed box are more sealed boxes, and as each one of those sealed boxes is opened, they're always empty. And please don't believe that either. It would be foolish to believe me. The only things that you should believe are the things that don't require belief, and that is your own direct experiences. One might wonder, why is it that one has not come to see that if they've opened 1,000 empty boxes and they have all come up empty, and they have opened 1,000 doors which promised many things, and yet when they opened every one of them, eventually they turned out to be empty rooms. Then why would one not come to the realization that all things in this life lead nowhere, and all things in this life are anticlimactic. Well, the reason is because of hope. There is a belief that is created by the mind which says, yes, 1,000 doors that you have opened have all led to empty rooms. I realize that. But what if 1,007 is the jackpot? And it is that very belief which keeps one hooked. Then, even if that person opens 7,000 doors, which leads to empty rooms, then there will always be that belief and that thought that 7,006 might be the jackpot. And if you stop now, if you abandon this hope at 7,000, then you might just forfeit that jackpot at 7,006 if you just would have stuck around a little bit longer. And this is how the mind leads human beings astray for their entire lives. But when one comes to see that all of the things that he had hoped for in this life, be it in his relationships with his family, his children, his successes, his failures, all of the things that he looked forward to in his life, all of the things that he thought would pan out and that wealth would make him, quote, happy, and that even happiness would make him happy. When one comes to the realization that he's finished, that he's done, that there really is no such thing as a full room behind a door, then one naturally begins to retreat from the worldly domain. And though he may still continue to live in the world, he lives above it, because he has come to see that everything in the end is empty, that hope leads nowhere. And for the person who views this as negative and pessimistic, I have no words of consolation for you. All I can say is this isn't for you. There is no amount of convincing that will undo that belief from you. This is direct truth, which absolutely implores that you do not believe it. So the cocoon of the moment is a place that one arrives at where the possibility of it arises, when one has no interest in any intermediary or prescription to get there, because he realizes that any trick that gets him there will trick him right out of it. I do not for 1 second believe that anyone should be in the moment. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's spiritual. I don't think it's holy. I don't think it's healthy. If you have a choice, it isn't for you. But when one is in the moment, it isn't a source of pleasure. The cocoon of the moment is a place in which one naturally forgets himself, and no, it is not noble to forget oneself. All of these things are practical realizations. They are nothing related in any shape or form to shoulds or properness or correctness or spirituality or holiness. It is about a human being returning to becoming a human being. The one who seeks materialism in this world is no different than the one who seeks spiritual materialism. If one seeks a Ferrari and another person seeks a way to get into the moment, they are both materialistic people. And once again, in the same breath, is it wrong to be materialistic? There is no wrong. It is just that it leads to pain. It leads to frustration. If one enjoys pain and frustration, then one is free to do so. And I'm not being facetious. I'm being genuine. It is foolish to try to bring a human being out of his own miseries, because the implicit belief is that the person wants to be relieved of his miseries. There is great pleasure in misery, because where there is misery, there is comfort, there is a sense of identity. It's home. So the moment has nothing to do with any sort of doing in order to get there. Buddhist monks are not in the moment. Zen disciples are not in the moment. They're too busy following their own cultural beliefs and rituals to get into the moment. The person who does a prescription or is looking for a way to get into the moment doesn't see the contradiction in that. The contradiction that is inherent in that is that a person cannot get into the moment because the moment only exists when the person disappears. There cannot be two. So how can you bring yourself into the moment when the very act of you bringing a you with you prevents the moment? If there was no you, there would be only the moment. There is nothing else. Now, what is the truth, regardless of whether you are ready for it or not, or you're ready to believe it or not, which you should not be ready to believe it? The truth is that the moment is all there really is. There is nothing else. Because the moment actually never goes away. It is the only thing that never dies. It is the only consistency. And reality is judged by that which never disappears. That is truth. So the moment, the cocoon of the moment, is for the person who is ready. Not ready to get a taste, or so that he can feel a dose of pleasure and come back and talk about how wonderful it felt. There's no difference between that and having a lollipop. These are for serious human beings, sincere human beings, who've come to the realization that no matter what they achieve in this life, in the end, it is nothing. And the one who achieves the moment, the one who is qualified to live in the moment, is the one who is ready to be nothing. Good night. The title of this solo podcast is The Prison of Need. I think the most essential thing to understand, and if you get nothing else out of this solo podcast, this would perhaps be the most resounding message that if you walked away with, it perhaps might benefit you. And that would be that whatever I'm about to say, the idea of trying to live up to it, or the idea of trying to achieve it, or the idea of thinking that this must be done because it's good for you and because it's healthy and because it's correct and it's proper and it's spiritual, that's a very significant mistake, because the things that I talk about, these are not things like, shining your shoes or, combing your hair in a particular way, or 5 different ways to make your skin cleaner. I mean, these are deep, deep-seated emotional and fundamental issues within human beings. They are well beyond the realm and the grasp of prescription. There isn't any way in the world that any human being alive could prescribe his way to such things, such as ridding himself or herself of need. Any attempt to rid oneself of need or attachment is an utter failure from the very beginning, because it's an attempt to adhere to an idea, and human beings only do things sincerely when they have no other choice, and they arrive at having no other choice when the pain and the disappointment and the misery of continuing on in the same way is simply no longer sustainable. Human beings have an enormous capacity for pain, an enormous threshold for misery. But when, for a given person, that threshold is reached and it can no longer be tolerated, it is only then that someone becomes a true candidate to walk this path. Anything short of that is one trying to live up to some notion that is good for him, and that will fail. That'll fail before you walk out the door, because it's just something like need is so deep within human beings. A person needs his spouse to love him. He needs his children to revere and respect him. He needs to be loved by his children. He needs to be told that he's doing a good job. He needs the adoration of his friends. He needs the companionship of various different people. He needs the validation of the world. The needs spread so far and so wide. They span the earth 16 times. How in the world would you begin to prescribe your way out of that? I mean, that's just, it's beyond unserious. The web of need is so intricate. The complexity and the tentacles of attachment run so deep within the human being that it makes him a complete prisoner. And even as I say that, don't agree with me, because what will happen is that your mind will say, what he's saying is right. It does make me a prisoner. It makes me sad. It makes me sorrowful. It leads to disappointment and pain and anxiety and stress. So that's right, it does. And I really need to get away from this attachment. You'll fail. That isn't powerful enough. Intellectual understanding isn't powerful enough. Say a situational attempt to flee isn't powerful enough. It's only when you hit a brick wall and the realization that behind that brick wall are an endless row of brick walls, then there's a chance. So forget about the idea of trying to get away from need or to overcome and dismantle all your attachments. Forget about achieving those things. If something benefits you or doesn't benefit you, whatever chances of that there are, it will only arise by listening with a genuine ear and not listening in order to follow, because I'm not telling you to do anything, so there's nothing to follow. But understand Not with understand, not so that you may do, but so that you may understand. You know, how many needs does a person have? And every compartment of his life, from his professional life to his personal life, there are an endless array of needs. He needs to become a success. He needs to make more money. He needs, when he goes to the grocery store, he needs the clerk to respond kindly to him. These things are so deep, and there are so many. And don't for a second think that you're right. I should not need the clerk to be happy with me. Let's just forget about all of those things. Never believe that the opposite of what I'm saying is the truth. The opposite of what I'm saying will lead you to the same hell as what I'm saying itself. Imagine for a second, not with any attempt or hope of arriving there. Just imagine for a second that you had no need. You did not need your family to love you. You did not need your children to look up to you or respect you or listen to you. You did not need to become a success. You did not need to become validated. You did not need for your friend to return your text message or your phone call. You did not need your boss to compliment you. You did not need to look handsome or pretty. You did not need to be considered cultured or fashionable. Imagine that if you had absolutely no needs, where you would be, what kind of life that would be. And I must say right from the start that this world is filled with people who give reflexive responses, who do not have the bandwidth to listen to anything without letting their mouth run wild with statements like, well, if I had no need, then why would I be here if I had no need? And blah, blah, blah. For those people, they need to just shut up and leave. This is not for them. This will never be for them. So don't waste my time or yours and just leave. I'm not interested in your comments. So this is for the people who are truly interested in silently, quietly allowing these words to seep into them to see if they find a home or if there's natural aversion to them, without any response whatsoever. Any response is a false response. And the quicker the response comes, the more of a fool the person is who's responding. So imagine for a second that if a person had no need, how freely that person would move in this world. Imagine that you did not need your child to look up to you. Imagine. That is ultimate freedom. Now, what would be the mistakes? What would be the holes? What would be the natural questions that arise? What would be the holes in the understanding of this? What would it mean to misunderstand? Well, what it would mean to misunderstand would be that if one viewed this as someone who was completely unfeeling and did not register anything that was going on around him. And that simply wouldn't be the case. In fact, if a person has no need, then that person is available to every single person in his life. A person who has no need is not a burden. And human beings are constant burdens to each other. And the greatest burden is the weight of need. But if you know someone or knew someone or imagined that you knew someone who needed nothing from you, now that's easy to say for someone who is a stranger, but imagine if it was a family member or a friend or someone close to you who needed nothing from you, who didn't need a thank you or an apology or not even a pleasant gesture. That person would be a person that you would naturally gravitate towards. Now, you gravitating towards that person wouldn't be that person's intent. He wouldn't care less. But being free of need isn't about making others peaceful in your presence. That's just a natural side effect. Being free of need, first and foremost, is to escape the imprisonment that need produces. And don't try to escape the imprisonment because you'll fail. But it is just the ultimate utopia to live a life without need. Now, why is it, or in what way would such a thing even be possible? Well, it would become possible when someone recognizes that this world can give no one anything. This world can give someone temporary pleasures. It does have that ability. But those temporary pleasures are temporary, and therefore they need to be replenished. So this world cannot give anything to anyone of any lasting value. No human being can give anything to any other human being of any lasting value. And it's very important that you don't listen to what I just said, because if you do, it'll be intellectual. You have to marry that with your own experiences of your own life that must be seen in retrospect with objectivity and deep analysis and nuance and sensitivity. Don't ever buy or believe what I say. When someone realizes that need leads to a brick wall, it leads to attachment, and attachment leads to pain and conflict and anxiety and fear, and that most importantly of all, that it simply cannot lead anywhere else but those places. You see, if there's a chance that need could lead to freedom, then it would be logical for human beings to entertain need, since there was a possibility that it could lead to freedom, even though the odds were very heavily stacked against that. But if there is zero chance that need can lead to freedom, then that might make a person consider and examine. So once again, I'm not trying to talk you into it. In fact, I'm trying to talk you out of it, if anything. I'm trying to talk you out of the idea of trying to get over need and attachment. But if you had no need in your life, you would move completely free in this world. Nothing would affect you. Everything would be greeted with a smile, and not a prescriptive smile, not a fake and false body language that is being taught to you as a reactive and defensive cosmetic attempt to pretend as if you are not being affected. But naturally, when you need nothing, you have everything. Good night. The title of this solo podcast is The Perfect Leader. What is the perfect leader? The perfect leader is the one who is pure. What does it mean to be pure? It means that a person has no insecurities. It means that he lives in total freedom. It means that within himself there are no self-conflicts. The problem with leading human beings is that if one tries to lead them, he meets with resistance. The very intention to try to lead is an egoic intention. Is there anything wrong with ego? There is nothing wrong with anything. The only thing that matters is if something is effective or ineffective. Wrong and right are for the foolish mores and fake ideals created by society. When a leader has no intention to lead, when he isn't really interested in helping, when his personal satisfaction does not come from the validation from his subordinates, then he is fit to become perfect. When a leader has conflicts within him, when he has fears, when he has anxieties, when he has insecurities, those fears, anxieties, and insecurities manifest. They are a lining which accompanies every word that he speaks and every action that he takes. As such, his words and his actions are impure. And the only reason that purity is something that I talk about is because of its effectiveness, not because it is a philosophical concept. The leader who is complete within himself will lead without trying to lead. There are so many problems that a leader faces when he is at the head of an institution or an organization or a company. And the things that he faces will drive him completely mad. From employee conflicts to all sorts of problems. He will spend his entire life putting out fires. This will become his identity. This will become his sole focus, even though this is not what he signed up for. And the reason this is the case is because this is the nature of human beings. It is in the nature of human beings to have conflict. It is in the nature of human beings to not want to see the truth about things. And if a leader enters that fray, he will become swallowed whole. And at the end of his career, he will look back and find that he has wasted his entire life. Trying to force human beings to do something, trying to convince them to act a certain way, does not lead to results. Human beings do things when they see that there is something in it for them. They do not do for another, though they may say they do. Even the things that any human being feels as if he is doing for another, he is actually doing for himself. And that is neither good nor bad. It is simply the nature of human beings. So the ultimate leader is the one who dives into the depth of his own mind in order to discover the holes that he has. Because he recognizes that all of the vulnerabilities that exist within him will be manifest. And the weak links in the chain that exist within his own mind will precisely be the weak links in the chain that exist in his company or his organization. A solidness of the interiority of a human being is the greatest predictor of the solidness of the quality of his life, the nature of his leadership, and the nature of his company. If one seeks the truth, and yet he is still sympathetic to the words of society, these are mutually exclusive concepts. Society is not interested in the truth. Any attempt to purposefully say this in order to make one's subordinates feel a certain way, or to do this in order to appease them, or to say this in order to make them feel comfortable. All of those things fail because they come from a place of cosmetic action. And that which comes from a place of cosmetic action is felt in the person who is receiving it. It is felt as being cosmetic. It is seen through, even though the employee or the subordinate or the soldier or whomever it may be may enjoy a temporary sense of pleasure that he receives. He will not respect it. Human beings don't respect things that are done for them necessarily. They respect things that are done from a place of purity, whether they realize it or not. But a leader has no interest in respect. He has no interest in reputation. If one is serious, he will want to discover the nature of human beings. To attempt to garner one's respect is foolish. People tend to respect those who need no respect, who don't put on airs. People tend to follow those people who have no interest in being followed, who could not care less what anyone else thinks. There is something within human beings that is at odds with the conscious mind of human beings. And it is that something which determines if one follows, not what the conscious mind of the human being thinks it will take for him to follow. The perfect leader is the one who achieves perfection in himself, the one who attains freedom from his own mind, the one who seriously and systematically delves into the nature of his fears, who sees with perfect clarity the chinks in his armor, because it is precisely in seeing these things that they go away. But any attempt to fix perpetuates the problem. And this is what society simply doesn't have the bandwidth to understand. There is no point in being a better leader. Why would one waste one's resources in becoming better when he can spend his life becoming perfect? The ultimate leader is able to stand on his own 2 feet, though the world may be crumbling around him. And this cannot be achieved by way of an action or a 5-step plan. It is when one is truly inspired by the arrival at such a place that these things are possible for him. It is only for the super serious, the genuine, the sincere. And such human beings tend to be very rare. If one is going to devote himself to anything, why not devote himself to perfection? Good night. The title of this solo podcast is The Limitless Human. Every human being is born and actually lives with a very precious, a very delicate, a very magical, and a very grand possibility. He does not realize this. He looks at things from the standpoint of potential. He does not see things from the standpoint of what he already has. This possibility that exists within him is something that is channeled from the void or from the ether, from some poorly understood and mysterious place which houses all the secrets of mankind. And every human being has it. What must be understood by the rare human, it frankly must be understood by everyone, but I know that the ears of everyone are not so attuned as to imbibe these sorts of truths. So for the individual who is that rare human, what he must realize is that this thing within him is a limitlessness. He has the ability to channel and to access ideas and magical possibilities and truths that he can use to his own benefit and for the benefit of the world. But it is so delicate. It is as delicate as a butterfly's wings. It is broken by a stiff breeze. It is so delicate that it can only live inside of a quarantined room. Any exposure to the outside world destroys it. contaminates it, minimizes it. Any association with any other human being is an enormous limitation. You did not hear what I just said because I spoke it too easily. Any association with another human being is an enormous limitation. One's limitlessness is only preserved and able to be accessed in complete solitude. Now, even solitude is a problem, because when one remains in solitude, his mind has still imbibed the conditioning of the outside world for however long he has lived. And it is that conditioning that speaks to him. So the mind is the world. The mind is a mirror of the world, internalized. When one is in solitude, that mind will speak the world's language to him. It will use words like "be practical," and "is this thing really possible?" and "what have others done?" and "what if you are wrong?" and all of these things, and what must be answered. I mean, these things are. This is really. Things that are never discussed about anywhere in society, anywhere. What must be understood is that these questions, or these comments made by the world / the mind, of is it practical, and what if it's not possible, and so forth. Everyone falls for the trap of trying to answer them. And then they go and associate with people, and it doesn't matter who it is. All people are useless. Every human being other than you is useless to you. He or she not only can, but absolutely will limit you. There is no choice. Because as I said, this possibility is so delicate that a stiff breeze destroys it. And association with human beings is a hurricane and a tsunami. Forget a stiff breeze. So what must be understood is that everyone will try to answer those questions, including you. You will try to reason with your mind and say, well, it is possible, and others have done it, and I can do it better, and so forth. And every answer that you give is a limited answer, because the question was limited. I'll say that again. Every answer that you give to a limited question must be a limited answer. If the question is, can you reach level 8? Your response will immediately begin at somewhere between 7 and 9. That's limitation. And it's an arbitrary limitation. When someone is asked the question, can you get to level 8? No human being begins at level 1000 in his response. Nobody. 0. That isn't how the mind is wired. It will always begin with whatever it's given. That is what it'll consider its starting point. And in most cases, its ending point. So true limitlessness the possibility of accessing that delicate, magical, limitless possibility, it only exists in solitude. Because there is no human being that you will ever meet in your entire life who will not limit you. he will give you answers. And the answers that he gives you will be society's answers. Every human being is infected. Every human being is a virus. Every human being is conditioned. It is for this reason that one must be quarantined. Now, that gets rid of a major problem, but then a new problem begins, and that is that the human being himself is conditioned. But at least now one can deal with one person's conditioning without having the added weight and added problems of added conditionings on a daily basis. So the possibility of becoming limitless only exists in isolation, in solitude. When one gets to the point with his mind that the idea of practicality no longer exists, then he jumps to a new level, an entirely new level. There are many, many more levels than that. And if the stiff breeze touches any of them, they will all fall like dominoes. So in one's own mind, one must create a universe of limitlessness. More accurately, one must create the permission for the limitlessness that already exists. And that permission is not found anywhere in this world. In fact, all that is found in this world are hindrances. And you will spend your life trying to surmount obstacles that are constantly thrown in your path. And each obstacle that you attempt to surmount will be a wasted amount of time. All these things take time. And you'll spend 50 years surmounting obstacles, none of which would have existed had you remained in isolation and not exposed this limitless possibility to the stiff breeze and the tsunami and the hurricane that is society. So one must arrive at the permission of no concept of practicality, of no concept of impossibility. Because if one does not remain in isolation, he will view things from the standpoint of what has already been done, and that will become his 8th level, so to speak. And even if he gets to level 10, that doesn't answer the question, that just answers the questions of competition, that he may become better. That does not even approach what the limitless level was. So, it is for this reason that I believe nobody, I talk to nobody, I imbibe nobody, I do not read books. I already know that everything out of everyone's mouth, no matter how intelligent it may sound, is conditioned. It is limited. And I don't view what people say, I don't play the game of comparing what they say versus what others say and then categorize one person's speech as more intelligent than another, because that's just comparing limitations. This person's a little bit less limited than this person. That's all a limited pursuit, the entire thing. So you have to go where no human being has gone before. And in order to go where no human being has gone before, you cannot go there with human beings. There's a reason why no human being has gone there before. And it isn't because he didn't have the aptitude. It is because his limitless possibility was destroyed. There can be no self-doubt. The mind cannot question you. There can be no practicality. There can be no comparison to what's already been done. Those are not the questions, and it's all about questions. The question is, where can I arrive if limitations simply did not exist? And you can look under every single rock in this world and you'll never find that question. All you will find in this world is limitations. Because everyone will speak to you according to their own conditioned responses. Now, one might wonder, what do I mean by one cannot use practicality? Well, practicality is always one of the main excuses that's given by the conditioned world. Be practical, be realistic. And as soon as you hear that, you're finished. Because then you're fighting, even if you don't believe that, then you're fighting against that statement. And that very fighting against it is a false obstacle that has been created against which you now have to spend energy and time fighting. Whereas if that never existed, if you didn't expose yourself to society or other people, then that false obstacle would not have arisen. So, insane, impractical, unimaginable, laughable possibilities. These are not meant for any serious individual to share with the world. For to share it with the world is to destroy them in the womb. This is why the serious person spends his time alone, overcoming and conquering all of the conditionings that have led to the clipping of the delicate wings of possibility. A human being has no limits. But as soon as he associates with people and society, he has nothing but limits. So the limitless human is the one who fears destroying the possibility that nature bestowed upon him. And he cannot risk giving that away. Good night. The title of this solo podcast is The Final Frontier of the Superhuman. So you've accomplished all that you've wanted to accomplish. You've made millions or billions of dollars, or you've achieved the pinnacle in your craft. You've become world famous. You've accumulated more wealth than you know what to do with. So in every regard, you are deemed amongst the super successful, the superhumans of society. So the question that I have now for you is, now what? There's a lot of years left to live. We don't know how many years there are, but there certainly could, chances are there are many years left. How are you going to fill that time? I think this is a question that perhaps not consciously, but at least subconsciously plagues many individuals who have achieved great things in their life and now are stricken by boredom and by listlessness and not really knowing what to do. Many people, it is shocking to me, many of the superhumans in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, when they were creating their own craft, when they were making their own art, they did everything their own way. And when they achieved what they wanted to achieve, or at least mostly what they wanted to achieve, they then delved into this thing called spirituality and in self-optimization and self-development and self-improvement. And when they delve into that arena, they went completely against their own principles. They went against their own grain. Whereas in their craft, they didn't listen to anybody. They did things according to what their instincts told them. When they delved into the world of self-development and spirituality, they began to listen to the so-called experts, the traditionalists, and they did everything that they never did in the creation of their own great craft. That's actually the norm, and it's very puzzling to me why humans would do that, why superhumans would do that in particular. They follow the traditions of the 20 minutes a day of meditation and the going to the silent retreats and the reading of books and all the, human beings love to subscribe to fashions so that they can show off. So that they can demonstrate how intelligent they are by saying that I've read 20 books and how many have you read. It's the new fashion statement as to how many books that you've read and how many silent retreats that you've been to, and that you're this new age and progressive sort of individual who is going above the mainstream by delving into Indian spirituality because it makes you somewhat cultured, or you believe that it optimizes you. And quite frankly, I think that's sort of silly. I think that's beneath the DNA of the superhuman. If the superhuman was going to be a true artist in his own domain, then why should he succumb to the status quo in any domain that he touches? So if he is truly serious about so-called spirituality and self-development, then the first thing that he'll do is begin to approach it in the way that is similar to the way that he approaches his own craft, by debunking all of the nonsense before he accepts one single word. But it doesn't seem to be that way. It seems that when great people from other domains come to this world, they seem to fall hook, line, and sinker for the traditions and the status quo, and they hire a meditation instructor with a ponytail and an Eastern accent, and they begin to change their name to some Indian name and chant, and they think they're getting somewhere. And that's very much of going through the motions. If you truly want to get somewhere, if you want to become serious, then let's talk. Let's talk about that right now. So in all these years that you have left, what are you going to do? Are you going to meditate them all away, hopefully become a little bit more peaceful, a little bit more happy, a little less conflict in your relationships? So everything is very menial. Everything is 2% this and 5% this and all this nonsense that you're taught. Well, if you're ultimate in your own craft, then why do you succumb to nonsense in these other things? So if you are going to be serious about it, then get serious. So let's talk seriously about that. Ask any of your meditation instructors if they can turn off their thought at will. Ask them that. I didn't say if they can meditate. I didn't say if they can practice mindfulness and all this silly nonsense, drivel. I say, can you turn off your thoughts at will? Can you switch off your mind when you want to turn it off? Do you have the ability to say to your mind, you can now speak, and now you must stay quiet, and your mind listens to you? When emotion gets to you, are you able to understand that that emotion has nothing whatsoever to do with you? Not intellectually, but viscerally, organically, naturally. Has that arisen within you? Have you cultivated the understanding that the things that you read in books, actually you can discover by reading yourself, by going deep inside yourself, and then you can know anything and everything, because all of nature's secrets are embedded within you, rather than reading 400 pages of something that can be said in a paragraph and a half, and yet so that you can go to cocktail parties and brag about how you've read 15 books this year. It's all social posturing. That's all this is. If you're serious, then get serious. Don't find a meditation instructor. Find out what exactly it is that you want. Find out what exactly is the outer limits of possibility for you. Then you're actually getting somewhere. And you're not getting somewhere so that you can say that you got somewhere. It actually changes the complexion of your entire life experience. The mind is a complete illusion. It creates nothing but illusion, and all of one's reality is created by this mind. Now, when someone hears that, when the so-called tradition follower hears that, the tradition-following superhuman hears that, he will then delve further into intellect so that he can have, quote, intelligent conversations with his peers in order to demonstrate how much he knows. So he'll ask questions like, what is consciousness? And what is the best way to practice mindfulness? And is all of this a simulation? And how is it that you can pursue life extension? And all of these pseudo-intellectual nonsense. It's just jargon. None of these people are really interested in really getting anywhere. The most fundamental of which is, can you turn off involuntary thought? That is an absolute superpower. And it isn't just to have the superpower. It is that when involuntary thought is turned off, one arrives at the truth. One's like all the things that one is seeking through these meditations and mindfulnesses and all of these ponytail type, chasing of the Eastern tree, is all of these things come for free, without effort. If one is truly sincere, if one truly wants to get somewhere, as opposed to wear the shiny, the orange robe and to light the incense and all of the fashion trends of the, quote, spiritual world. If you're truly serious, you actually have the DNA as a superhuman to then turn that DNA in this direction so that you can cultivate and discover what the truths really are, the same way that you discovered them in your own profession, which is why you became legendary in your own profession. So why would you acquiesce? Why would you bow down to the status quo and the common thinking if you never did that in your own profession? That happens a lot in golf as well. You see executives who are absolutely world class, and they come to golf and they hire a golf instructor to tell them where to put their left arm, how to stand, how tall to make their posture, what the first move away with the swing is, and they spend 30 years and never get anywhere. And I've always been fascinated that you're the person who went against everything in your own domain, and yet you come and you fall for the traditions and the culture when you were a complete anti-culturalist in your own profession, which is why you became great. Why do you think it's any different in anything else? Every culture is smitten and saturated by trivial ideas, regurgitated concepts, and nonsense. It is not based upon truth. So if you're going to study as a superhuman, if you're going to delve into the world of so-called spirituality, then pursue it from the standpoint of mind. Discover what it is that you really want. Discover where it is that you want to arrive, not what you want to practice, so that you can show off and demonstrate how much you practice. Get serious. The same way that you were serious in your own profession, become serious here, because the same things that you would not listen to in your own profession are the same things that are going on here. The mind is is the sort of final frontier that space could not hope to match. This mind creates for us the entire reality that we believe to be true. And because we believe it to be true, these beliefs have consequences, and our entire life, our actions are based upon the beliefs that the things that we hear and that we think and that we are told are true. And that is a massive departure from reality, which is exactly why we suffer from emotional turmoil and sadness and depression and sorrow and endlessly chasing the mythological idea of happiness, which it does not exist. There is no happiness. The only reason the idea of happiness even exists is because misery is everything. If there was no misery, there would be no happiness. So happiness is a concocted idea that is created as a reaction to misery. And the reason that misery exists because the truth is not known. Whenever the truth is not known, then what is known in place of the truth are concepts. And these concepts are heavily flawed. And because they're heavily flawed, acting upon them creates confusion. Confusion creates failure. Failure creates sadness. This creates a destruction of relationships. This creates a massive hole in seeing what is really there. It saps one's clarity. So truth, peace, clarity, insight leads to dispassion. It leads to a person who is untouched by no matter what happens to him. That's a holy grail, that regardless of what may happen to you, you are unaffected. If you choose to be affected, you may be. If you choose not to be, you are not. That is coming truly into one's own. That is becoming a true superhuman, not just in one's craft, but in this final frontier. This is worth devoting a lifetime to. So the superhuman, if you're listening, be superhuman in all things, not just in the craft that you pursued, and understand that if you come to a new domain that you know very little about, that virtually everything that you hear will be wrong, the same way it was wrong in your own profession. Be serious, get somewhere. The mind is truly the final frontier. Good night. The title of this podcast is Prescriptions Are For The Unserious. There's been a lot of questions over a number of years regarding my take on what I call prescriptions. And by prescriptions, I don't just mean sort of medication prescriptions and things like that. By prescriptions, I essentially mean a how-to, a technique-based and methodology-based view on things. And if we examine society in any domain, in any discipline, even if you were to do a Google search on a particular topic, essentially 100% of what you would find is that it would all be based upon the viewpoint of this is how you do it. If you want to overcome depression or sorrow, or you want to become more joyful, or if you want to develop a certain skill, or if you want to become better at something in business or in sports, whatever it may be, the only angle that is available through the auspices of society is the idea of a prescription and a methodology and a 5-step plan and a 10-step way to do this, and essentially a litany of list posts concerning the method and the technique by which to pursue something. Now, what is wrong with that? Well, it isn't really a question of right and wrong. And I think the first and foremost, the thing that needs to be understood is that if one adopts the idea that one should not pursue prescriptions, that would be short-sighted. That would lead to problems in its own right. And the reason that that would is because then that would also become a prescription. So the idea isn't that you shouldn't follow prescriptions. It really is an understanding. It really is a nuanced examination of why this happens to be the case. So if you examine a prescription and someone says to you, well, this is how you do it. Now, if it's something mechanical, like turning a screw or hammering a nail, or things along that line, which are essentially basic actions that require essentially no form of great art, then prescriptions are fine. And how to turn on a computer, very basic mechanical level things. But anything besides that, anything that involves skill or the domain of art or emotion or anything at all that relates to the mind or how to live in the world or whatever it may be, or developing a skill in which you become world class at, prescriptions have essentially no place whatsoever. And the reason is that when you are told how to do something, what will inevitably happen is that the mind will begin to focus upon the how. It'll begin to focus upon the thing that is being said, as opposed to the thing that the how happens to be about. There is an old saying that if you point your finger at the sky, the world will look at the finger and miss the sky. And it is very poignant in the setting of prescriptions. Everything in the society is based upon, let me show you what the right way is and what the wrong way is. If you look at, for instance, self-development, which I think largely is a farce, self-improvement, self-development, because it is all based upon prescriptions. You should do 20 minutes of meditation. You should practice mindfulness. You should practice loving kindness. You should do this, that, and the other. And what will happen is that the people will begin to do that. And by doing that, they will hope that because I did this, this should lead me somewhere. And that isn't really how anything works, because if that was true, and it's best just to look at the evidence, if that was true, then the millions upon millions who meditate and practice mindfulness would become Buddhas. They'd become enlightened. They'd become self-realized, whatever word that you want to use. And I think that anybody can see that that simply isn't the case. So prescriptions are not the road to anywhere except prescriptions. Prescriptions and how-tos lead only to prescriptions and how-tos. If I say to you, well, what you must do is practice mindfulness and meditation, for instance, then what will happen is that you will do the mindfulness and you will do the meditation. And then you will wonder, well, where is the result? Where is the enlightenment? Where is the freedom from involuntary thought? Where is the peace? How come it hasn't arrived yet? And that question you will keep asking, but it'll never really arrive because you are pursuing it by way of an intermediary. And so if you go back to the person who says that, invariably what you'll get is, well, you haven't practiced it long enough, or you must do it in a different way, or you aren't quite doing it right. And if you do it right, then it will, quote, work. But if we examine, for instance, monks, who live in monasteries, they practice meditation and mindfulness for hours upon hours every single day, far more than even the most committed and devoted meditator in society. And to be honest, they don't get anywhere either. They are essentially following the prescriptions of their religion or their path. If you look at Buddha, when he first went into the forest, as Siddhartha, and he met the ascetics, and the ascetics essentially gave him a load of prescriptions. He was eating 1 grain of rice per day, drinking his own urine, became emaciated. really, really, sat in the rain day and night. His flesh began to rot, and which is fine if that's the price that you must pay. He was willing to pay it. But what he realized after 6 or 7 years is that he was no closer to enlightenment than he was when he first came to the forest. And frankly, the ascetics who were telling him to do these things had been doing it far longer than he had, and they had gotten nowhere. And I think the reason was that the ascetics really weren't interested in enlightenment. I think the ascetics were interested in being ascetics. And that's what they got. But he wasn't there to be an ascetic. He was told that if you are an ascetic, then the ascetic is the intermediary to becoming enlightened. And when he learned that that simply isn't the case, he left on his own, and he sat under the Bodhi tree, and he said, "My bones may rot, and my skin may wither, and I may die, but I will not arise from this place until I reach enlightenment." Now, that's sincerity. That was seriousness. It wasn't that if I meditate this long, then it will come. Because if that was going to happen, then the ascetics who told him to do that, they would have become enlightened, and they never did. So this whole idea is so embedded within the fabric of society and within the mind of human beings that it is so invisible. It is never even examined. If you were to tell someone, well, you don't approach things by way of a how-to, he would say, well, what do you mean? Well, of course, what else is there? There's only the how. And the same thing happens in business and in professional sports. It's all based upon the how. Whenever a professional golfer, for instance, does not do well in a tournament, the place that he always goes after the tournament is to the range in order to work on his technique, even though he's been playing golf for 20, 30, 40 plus years. So something must have gone wrong with his technique that day that he needs to address. There's this constant chase of things, and the chase really has nothing to do with anything. It isn't based upon any reality. It is just that this is the only thing that the world knows. In many ways, I don't blame the professional golfer for doing that, because that's all he's been told, and that's all that society has been sort of repeating through the megaphones, as well as in his culture for his entire career. That's all he's ever known. It's all about technique. There is nothing else. So prescriptions and how-tos lead to enormous limitation. They just create more questions. If you're told how to do this, then you will come back and say, well, am I doing it correctly? And then the person will say, no, you're doing it this way when it needs to be done this way. Then you'll go back and correct your actions or thoughts or behaviors or habits, whatever they may be. Then you'll come back and then you'll say, well, is that correct? And the person will say, well, that's you're doing better. Just keep doing it. And so forever and ever and ever, you were always wearing a blindfold. You were always blind, allowing someone else to lead you by the hand. And you work by way of faith. You work by way of a promise that if I do X and Y, then something will one day arrive. And whenever something is done by way of faith or promise, it never really arises. The things that you have in your life are things that you did not arrive at by faith or promise. They were things that you had to have, and therefore you could not risk relegating them to faith and promise, because you had to have them. It is only the things that that you may want, but you don't have to have, that they are not life and death to you. Those are the things that you will relegate to prescription, because subconsciously you know that even if you don't get them, it's sort of all right. The things that you absolutely have, you will one way or another create your own how. And that's how things work. When you know the what, you will create your own how. If you have understanding as to what creates what is the causality that creates a particular effect, you being invested with that understanding will allow you to move forward on solid ground with open eyes, knowing what produces what and what does not produce what. Therefore, you will not move forward based upon faith, based upon the words of another, based upon a promise, based upon ascetics telling you that you should meditate and practice mindfulness in order to achieve enlightenment, as they did to Siddhartha. So you see this all the time across all domains. The people who become great are never the ones who follow prescriptions to get there, because if you did, then essentially anyone else could follow the same prescription and get to the same place. And so the greatest CEOs and the greatest professional athlete and the greatest performing artist and the greatest, singer and the greatest writer, you could follow their, quote, habits if you like. You can follow, what they do on a daily basis and the mechanical and physicality of what they do, but you won't get there. You won't become them. Because they didn't arrive at that by such mechanical black and white means. They arrived there through circuitous routes that were unplanned and that were largely by surprise. But the one thing that got them there was a life and death desire to somehow get there. And it wasn't by way of a script, and it wasn't by way of 5-step plans. That is, I think, clear to everyone that simply practicing golf won't make you Tiger Woods. Because frankly, these experiments have already been done. If you look at the other players on the PGA Tour, none of them are Tiger Woods. And they are not by any means lazy. They put in the time, they put in the work, they put in the, quote, hard work. They have their coaches and instructors, and so they're doing all that they can, but no one is even close to Tiger Woods. So there's more evidence that it isn't about the doing and the following and the prescribing and the adherence to various laws and various rules that gets anyone anywhere. It is an undying desire that really gets someone somewhere, and the path is always circuitous. It is never a straight line. It's never clean. It's never black and white. It's always vague. It's always the truth is always spontaneous. It's never ever scripted. So it's the understanding that a how is an intermediary. In many ways, every how is a how not. You could view it that way, and it would actually pan out quite nicely. Whenever someone tells you a how, that if you want to achieve this, then what you must do is this, this, and this, and that thing isn't mechanical, like give me 20 push-ups and 40 sit-ups. I mean, those are mechanical things once again. But anything that's related to art or true skill or arriving at a high level in your profession, or things like, quote, self-development or arriving at a place of peace within yourself, those things are never, ever, they don't have, prescriptions don't have the power to create that. If they did, then, as I said, you would see Buddhas all over the place, and you would see that those who practice mindfulness would have conquered the mind and involuntary thought. And yet what that leads essentially to is just an endless horizon of practice. It seems that human beings are far more enamored by the idea of practice than they are with the idea of arrival. Very few people actually want to get there. They actually want to play the part more than they want to get there. They're far more interested in the idea of working hard and putting in the effort and almost bragging to themselves, if not others, that look at what I'm doing. Look at how much effort I'm putting into it. I'm a good person because I'm practicing X, Y, and Z. But the truth never really is based upon morality. The truth is never based upon what the right thing to do is, what the wrong thing to do is. The truth is always based upon what actually works, what is effective. So it doesn't really matter what you do. It really matters where you really want to go, or where you really no longer want to be. So the sincerity and the seriousness is what gets anyone anywhere, not the mechanics, not the methodology, not the technique. And that's why I say prescriptions truly are for the unserious. I think secretly and deep down, those who ask how precisely are those who don't want to get there. I think how is a cop out of a question, because I think the person who asks how, and for instance, who will ask me commonly is well, how do you get rid of involuntary thought? As if in a Twitter message, I can give you 5 steps to get rid of involuntary thought. I mean, these are otherworldly things arriving at the top of Everest. I mean, these are truly elixirs of mankind. The fact that they can be reduced to a 5-step plan is really, really silly. And I think that the person asking that actually knows that. He's sort of just doing it to pass time. And deep in his heart of hearts, he knows he doesn't want that. He would never ask that kind of question if he was serious. He would truly investigate himself, and he would ask questions that are qualitatively fundamentally different than just how do you do that. I mean, it's almost flippant to ask a how. How do you become enlightened? How do you stop involuntary thought? How do you conquer the mind? How do you become world class? It's almost a flippant question. It's so unserious that even the person asking it knows it's unserious. What possible answer could any human being give to that? And if a person truly gave you an answer in a 5-step plan, then he would be just as unserious as the person asking the question. So those who ask how are simply not serious. They don't really, really want to know. They just sort of want to go through the motions and play the game of pretending to want to know. So the things that you do the greatest, the things that you are artful at, the things that you are world class at, whatever they may be, are precisely the things that you know not how you do. The how is only completely evident to you for the things that you don't do very well, because those things are not art. Art is in many ways a mystery. It comes out of the blue. It happens spontaneously. It catches one by surprise. It is not something that is mechanical. It is not something that is scripted or rehearsed. Even giving a speech, even as I do this solo podcast, there's nothing scripted about it. If you give a talk on stage, to script it and to plan it and to tell a joke every 4.2 minutes and to try to engage the audience and to try to gain applause and to try to be entertaining, those are all quite unserious and silly things, because those are all done for self-gratification. They are done as ulterior motives in order to gain something from the audience. If you truly wish to give a good talk, and then you won't really worry if it's good or not. You'll speak from the heart, and it'll be genuine. It'll be authentic. And there is something within the hearts of human beings that can recognize that which is truly authentic, that which is truly genuine, that which is truly not done in order for gain or for applause or whatever it may be. I think that those receptors absolutely exist within us, whether we realize them or not, and we can feel it, we can sense it, we can taste it upon hearing it, whether someone is truly being genuine or if they're trying to feed us a line or if they're trying to get something from us or whatever it may be. So without genuineness and without sincerity and without seriousness, there really isn't any arrival of any sort. There really is only a going through the motions and it's a plastic approach to things. So these are the reasons why prescriptions really are a path to nowhere, primarily because those who ask for them really are not interested in getting there. And society always creates a supply for where there is a demand. And naturally, there's always going to be a demand for unserious things. Human beings being human beings, there's always going to be far more unserious people than there are going to be serious people. Therefore, the supply for unseriousness is going to far outweigh the supply for seriousness. So, the things that I talk about, the things that I mention, the things that I post, this really, in some ways, it is for everyone, but practically speaking, it really isn't hardly for anyone. It's really for a very small number of people. It is by no means for the masses, because the masses like to have everything dumbed down. They like to have everything stripped of all its essence, so that it can be reduced to a soundbite and to a 5-step plan and to a how-to and a prescription. And certainly society caters to that, and there's plenty of avenues for that. And frankly, that's a match made in heaven. So this really is only for a very small number of people, the people who truly are serious and recognize that the amount of years and the amount of time that we have left on this earth is very, very small. And if one really seeks to get somewhere, then there really is no time to waste. There's no time chasing ghosts. It really is about seriousness and truly arriving somewhere. So this in whole and in total is why I say that prescriptions are fundamentally for the unserious. Thank you. The title of this solo podcast is On the Creation of Pure Art. One must examine what it is that he receives from something, because that provides the motivation for doing it. And if what the human being receives is transient and fleeting, then that's a fairly sure sign that both the motivation and, as a result, the execution of the act was impure. Now, it must be stated at the outset that purity and impurity are not ideals to follow, because ideals are empty things. If one tries to follow an ideal, he or she is trying to live up to something. Whereas if one is overcome by something, if one has a true and genuine allegiance to something, then that person does not need to follow the path or any steps in order to make sure that he is keeping up with that ideal. If something really speaks to a human being, he can't not do it any other way. There is no choice. If one tries to live up to an ideal, then some days he will be successful in living up to it, and other days he will fall off, and he will spend the rest of his life acquiring it and losing it. It will become a life of struggle as it relates to that particular thing. So human beings actually in life get exactly what they want, because the greatest desire always wins. And that which one truly and genuinely desires, he reaches out for it in that very moment. That which he does not desire, and he approaches from the standpoint of shoulds and health and good for you and spiritual and correct, he does in a prescriptive manner, and he does it at arm's length, because it isn't true to him. It is just something that he's been told that he should do, and as a result, he will be very lukewarm towards it, when he has time, in a part-time fashion, he will reach out towards it, and if he gets it, he gets it. If he doesn't, he doesn't. But he'll keep a scorecard as to how long he had it and how long he didn't have it. Then he'll discuss it with his friends as to how many times he's grasped it. Then he'll laugh with his friends about how easy it is to lose it, and this is an entirely disingenuous affair. So human beings actually get exactly what they want. The things that a human being has are the things that he couldn't live without, and the reason that you know that is because he already has them. The things that he talks about are the things that he doesn't want. He just talks about it because that talking is a surrogate, and is a camouflage for having to admit the fact that he doesn't really want it. So there's no should want and should not want. One has to become genuine if someone is going to find truth. So as it relates to art, the purity is not an ideal. Then what is the point? Well, it is. Everyone seeks as human beings, a sense of otherworldliness, a sense of mystique, a sense of magic. Everyone seeks an escape from the mundane. And human beings look for this escape in entirely cosmetic means, through ingestible substances such as alcohol, through socialization, through watching television, through various other means. And 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 in the pursuing of such things, one approaches these things in a glancing blow. One never arrives anywhere. He just tries to string together drops of pleasure in hopes of creating an ocean of satisfaction. And it's my instinctive compulsion to tell you that that does not work, but I don't think that you need me to tell you that. Any human being can examine his life and see with clear eyes that if seeking pleasure truly did work, then the person would no longer be seeking pleasure. So what is it about purity? Well, it is only purity brings satisfaction. When I write a discourse, when I write a private discourse or I create a solo podcast, what is the motivation? And I'm often asked this question on Twitter and through emails, and even through my private client consultations. And the honest answer is that there is no quote motivation. The compulsion and the instinctive trigger is to achieve the glorious satisfaction that arrives from losing myself. So if someone was to put a gun to my head and say that now you will do a solo podcast and you will do or write a private discourse, and you will do so in order to be informative, you will do so because it is your job, you will do so because you need to help other people by giving them information that might help them, that gun might as well go off, because while I would be dead if the gun did go off in my head, I would also be dead if I did it according to the way that I was told to do it, because providing information is dead and empty. Doing things from the standpoint of a job and as work that's a corpse that brings absolutely no satisfaction. And if it doesn't bring me satisfaction, then there's no motivation for me to do it. So it provides an opportunity for me to lose myself. And if I sing a song or if I write something, that the the complete and total dissolution of the person who's writing it, and the complete and utter immersion in in the in the witnessing of the creation of the words, which do not come from me in any conscious or deliberate manner, that is the ultimate satisfaction. And to extend that and to live my entire life in that state, in which the horrid and wretched tragedy called the self, with all its stories and its baggage and its never-ending complexities, does not exist. This is the only true satisfaction there is. The attempt to try to get oneself into the moment is yet another plastic idea painted on the sidewalks of society, because if one tries to get into the moment, so to speak, then what he is trying to do is bring himself into the moment, and the moment and the self are a mutually exclusive phenomenon. And it is the same with the creation of pure art. So the creation of pure art is an excuse for me to lose myself. And it must be clearly understood that me losing myself is not a holy, spiritual, altruistic, selfless, or admirable act. It is entirely utilitarian. It is completely necessary, because living within the self is such a drastically unsatisfying proposition. So the creation of pure art lies when one completely dissolves into the art. And when it is amazing that how the human organism is created, that when one loses himself, then the notes that one is able to hit with such perfection in his songs, that the insights that one becomes privy to and is able to access from the ether and the other world, just by virtue of creating a channel in which those things can flow through, as a result of having removed the interference of the self, is truly astounding. Man's reach is boundless, it is unlimited. But if he tries to go on that journey with this ball and chain called the self, then he is nothing but the perfect example of limitation. So the purity of art is art expressing itself through the human. It is not the manufacturing of an art from the human. The purity of the art is the result of the human dissolving into the art. And in the end, it is precisely this that all human beings seek. They seek the dissolution of the self in losing themselves in things like socialization and in ingesting exogenous substances, because they cannot stand living with this self and its tragic history and its enormous baggage and all of the stories and the dramas that never go away and which can never be fixed. Every human being seeks freedom from this. And this is what human beings do not realize. So all that is done without the self, all that is done which is from the standpoint of annihilation of the idea of a self, is something which supports and cultivates and tills the soil for the growth of true art. Good night. The title of this discourse is Lunch is for Wimps. That's a quote from Gordon Gekko, who's a character from Oliver Stone's masterpiece called Wall Street. Essentially, that is symbolic for the idea of socialization and the truth that those who truly become great tend to be against the grain in every way, not the least of which is isolating themselves from the traditions and the common ways of people in society. This discourse really isn't about teaching you what to do, or just like all the other things that I write. I mean, it really isn't to tell anyone what to do, because those things generally go nowhere. The question, and it's all about questions, the question is not whether one should socialize or not socialize, or whether he should be in a group or isolate himself. There is no right or wrong. There's nothing for me to tell you or anyone else what is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. Rather, it's about understanding that society can only bring someone down. Now, if someone is already down, then society is not going to really harm them, because the conditioning is already complete, and or that individual does not have that sort of DNA that that is really threatened by society. But there, amongst elite circles, in business and in sports and in all domains, there is obviously the traditions and the natural way of being of human beings is to socialize, is to get together, is to have a cocktail party, is to have group dinners, and there's nothing wrong with that or right with that. But I think that something often goes missed, and that is that those things are seen as completely harmless and or a way to derive a sense of pleasure without producing any untoward side effects. I think that's a mistake. The recognition that socialization has a cost is a recognition that is lost on the vast majority of people, because it is seen truly as harmless. Whatever environment an organism exposes him or herself to, that organism has no choice whatsoever whether he or she will become conditioned by that environment. No one is powerful enough to remain immune to conditioning. That, I think, is a fundamental truth that must be realized, and it will. And the truths that I talk about generally are best imbibed by those who are elite in their craft, because those who are already elite tend to be very sympathetic and have an open eye and an open ear for ways to become elite in all parts of their life. Their DNA is already there. So now it's just a matter of shining that light in a different direction. Those who are not elite and or who don't have any interest in being elite, no one starts from 0 and gets to 100. It doesn't really happen. Those are nice sort of rags to riches stories, but they're not true. They may be true from a financial standpoint, that one had nothing and ended up becoming wealthy. That's fine, but that DNA was always there. They didn't start from 0. So these things are not for the masses. These things are not for the people who don't have that sort of desire / DNA / sincerity / seriousness. So these are for the people who already have something of a DNA, and or who have already gotten there, so to speak, in a particular domain. They have a lot to lose. The person who is elite in his domain has a lot to lose by socialization, because whatever group that he finds himself amidst, it may be that there's one person there who he can truly benefit from a conditioning perspective, but that's very unlikely. It is virtually certain that the vast majority, in most cases, all the people who he socializes with are going to bring him down in ways that he does not realize. That's the danger. If someone brings you down in ways that you realize, then you can do something about it. You can counteract it. You can stop associating with that person. It becomes evident. But the danger really is in the things that are not seen. Human beings will always regress towards the mean, always. Just like water that laps the edge of a rocky shore, over time erodes that rocky shore. That rocky shore has no choice but to be eroded. So, a lot of times there's a habit of doing things because you sort of fall into habits without knowing that you're doing them. And because everyone else is doing them too, it's never questioned. But, if you examine what you being among the elite, if you examine what you say at these parties and the things that you discuss and the jokes that you laugh at and the topics that are talked about, it's all drivel. I mean, of what meaning is it? Of what significance is it? What is it besides just passing the time? So these are very low-level things for someone who himself isn't low-level. And each time that is done, then one imbibes subconsciously things that sort of takes the edge off of his uniqueness. It sort of dulls the sharpness of his rarity. And the very recognition that is at risk, that his uniqueness and his rarity and his originality, that those things are at risk, I think changes the game. Because then one does not view socialization as harmless. Everything in this life has a cost. Everything. From the things that are most menial to the things that are most apparently significant. Nothing is free. So the person who truly seeks the truth about these things will recognize that there is a cost to socialization as well. I'll go so far as virtually all the friends that an elite person has are not to his benefit. They are to his detriment. They are bringing him down, whether he realizes that or not. So the person who realizes these things, if he isn't already a loner, if he isn't already a recluse, if he isn't already an isolationist, he will see the practical benefit of being so. And this is not any sort of recommendation that one should be. It is in seeing the truth, one is able to make up his own decisions as to what will benefit him most and what will bring him harm. So overall, socialization is an incredible waste of time. If there is a very particular reason for it, one seeks to make a particular connection in their business, or one needs to meet someone that could be of that he could provide value to, and the other person could as well. Those are strategic and potentially beneficial things. But in those situations, one is going in with their eyes open. They're going in with a particular focus, as opposed to going in unguarded. And going in unguarded is when the floor falls out. That's when problems usually arise. Whatever you do with open eyes, it tends to not hurt you. But the things that you are unaware of, the things that you become blindsided by, those things happen as a result of not knowing the domain in which you're walking into, where the traps lie, so to speak. If you watch human beings, it's said that human beings are social creatures. I'm not. I have no evidence for that. I'm not certain that that's the case. I know for a fact that human beings like to justify what they do, and they justify the status quo. And since they enjoy being social, it's very easy to say that they were meant to be social creatures. But of what benefit is this socialness that happens? Much of social media is an insult. Posting pictures of silly things, and people talking about them walking their dog today. I mean, this is valuable human time that never returns, that is being spent on frivolousness. The addiction to smartphones and internet and the proliferation of these things is an enormous cost to the quality of human life. Human beings just waste their lives across the board, whether it is the elite or whether it is the common. They all waste their lives. The question is, how much of their lives are they wasting? And it is the dramatic realization of that on a visceral level, that one is indeed wasting their life, even though they may have earned billions of dollars and created great things or become a superstar. That's fine, but the fact that one is still wasting their life is a realization that when it hits home to one or maybe two people, that's a game changer. That has a fairly pronounced impact. That has the power to have them change course. And once again, it isn't my recommendation that they should change course. My desire to change someone is practically non-existent. I find that these things are of value to speak about, largely for myself. I enjoy speaking about things that are deep and are not seen in society. And this is very much one of them. Socialization is largely a complete waste of time. It is the filling of empty space. And frankly, so is the idea of productivity. Productivity is busy work. I mean, that's a podcast for another day. But productivity is busy work. It's so what that you got 20 things done today. They're not. Most of those things are not significant anyways. So the quality of life is really a matter of engagement. How lost and how engaged something is in the creation of something. Not that the creation of it, to be honest, actually matters, but the quality of the life is at its peak when someone is fully engaged in something, as opposed to doing things for an ulterior motive, or as opposed to doing things because it's, quote, good for them, or because it's, quote, healthy. So this is a view on socialization that society does not offer up. In fact, it's the opposite. Society creates groups and institutions and conferences and meetings and social events and cocktail parties and get-togethers and cookouts and all of these things in order to bring people together to talk about drivel. Uh, Take this for what you will. I have no recommendations, but Gecko's right. Uh, Lunch is for wimps. Good night.